Good afternoon and welcome to today's Link Senior webinar. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar is providing one free NAB and one free NCAP CEU credit. And starting this month, we are also providing one free CEU credit through the National Council of Certified Dementia Practitioners. To be eligible for the CEU credits today, you must stay on the webinar for the full hour. At the end of the webinar, I will provide the required post-webinar survey evaluation link in the webinar room chat box. I will also send it to today's participants via constant contact. Please be sure to check your email spam folder. You must fill out this survey no later than midnight this Thursday, June 13th, to be eligible for CEU credit. And if you are not looking for CEU credit today, we still want your feedback. So please go ahead and fill out the survey as well. The PDF of today's PowerPoint presentation deck is in the handout section, as well as an additional handout for the presentation today. And CEU certificates will be issued this Friday by email. And again, please check your spam folder. I'm now going to hand things over to Charles D. Vilmorin, Link Senior CEO.
Thank you very much, Megan. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We're actually very excited to have Dr. Richardson talk to us about using positive psychological approaches in resident engagement. What's great about this presentation today is it was actually a request from one of you who attended previously, and obviously, as we know, our industry is very, historically has been pretty good at focusing only on the negatives and the reason why people are here with us in senior living and senior care. So it's a great, very informative webinar. Excited to be introducing Dr. Nancy Richardson. Before I do that, I'd like to give a little bit of context for the people that haven't been on our webinar before. We at Link Senior, we provide a resident engagement platform to senior living. So in other words, we provide software to help assisted living, memory care, and nursing homes engage their residents. And as we were talking to people, activity directors, life enrichment, nurses, CNAs, a lot of people were saying that it was difficult for them to have access to quality education at the comfort of their desk through their workday. So we started these webinars a year and a half ago, actually, and they were met with an incredible success. We've had more than 4,000 people join us. And again, the root idea of us doing so is to help people like you have access to the best-in-class research, best practices, case studies, ideas on how can we deliver the best experience and person-centered care to our residents, the older adults under our care. We've been fortunate to have amazing speakers in the past. For example, Dan Cohen from Music and Memory, Nancy Ewald, the founder of Activity Connection. And again, a lot of these come from sometimes requests from people like you. So again, as Megan was saying, when you provide feedback, if you have an idea of a speaker that we should highlight, please feel free to let us know. As I said, Megan introduced me. I'm Charles Vilmorin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Link Senior. And again, Link Senior is a resident engagement platform for the whole continuum of senior care. We're fortunate today we serve more than 40,000 residents in US and Canada. And we're excited to be one of the, if not the only platform today to have best-in-class research that shows that not only the use of our software can help people like you improve the quality of the life of the residents, but we also have measurable clinical and financial outcomes. And so I'm flashing some of these results. Some of these results are available on our website, but if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Today's presentation will be given by Dr. Nancy Richardson. She's the Associate Professor at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. And with that, I'd love to introduce and have Dr. Richardson start the presentation. Nancy, if you want to start presenting, like moving the slides yourself, feel free to do so. And if you have any issues, let us know.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be here today. I want to start with, make sure everybody has a pen and paper. I think it's helpful to kind of take notes along the way, and that will help if you have any questions later on as well. But I just wanted to say that really my goal today, I have a lot of information, is to increase your curiosity about positive psychological approaches, and then how to use these approaches in your engaging activities or interventions and in your programming on a daily basis. So really just think about, I'm increasing your curiosity. So we're going to talk about the 3 cornerstones of positive psychology, which are positive emotions, positive individual traits, and positive institutions. I'm going to talk about a couple philosophies. One is the best friends approach, and one is Tepesno's positive approach to the different stages of dementia. And then the last one, I'm going to talk about how to encourage action on these topics. And one process is called appreciative inquiry, and that is an action item, and it's a positive psychological approach to help you move forward with these ideas. So those are the objectives. So the tenants really, again, are positive emotions and interactions, building great relationships, and also great institutions and society using these tenets. So the care theories that are associated with positive psychology are person-centered care. I'm sure you've all heard of that. Strength-based, so using people's strengths, and then relationship-focused care. And there are some techniques associated here. I'm going to specifically talk about appreciative inquiry, but there's also something called compassionate communication. You can look into that a little bit yourself if you become curious about that. And then again, the 2 approaches, I'm going to talk about best friends and Tepesno's positive approach to care. So why and what is positive psychology? So really, the why has to do with, psychology's made great strides in understanding what goes wrong with individuals, families, groups, and institutions. But they haven't really focused on what goes right. And so that's what positive psychology really is. It's the study of conditions and processes that contribute to, and these are 2 kind of key words that you'll probably hear often, are flourishing and then optimal functioning, to help people grow throughout their lifespan. And there's a good reference here at the end if you're interested in kind of the what and whys of positive psychology. Here we have a little bit about brain science. And I like this concept of 60 seconds to change your brain. There's been some research on brain science that, as it relates to positive psychology, suggesting that you can change the neuroplasticity of your brain. And that's really changing the way the brain is hardwired. And these little 60 seconds change your brain might be, a fun way to think about, how to help the residents that you're working with, change the neuroplasticity in their brain. So here's, I think, a good one. You could use these as icebreakers or again as just, 60 seconds throughout the day to help people think about being a little bit more positive. So starting the day with a yawn and a stretch, having people contemplate like what's their most deepest value, or it could be what are you grateful for, things like this. And then really having them focus on what's the first word that comes to mind and repeating the word to yourself, contemplating it, and only it, for about, 30 seconds total. And then think about how this might be a great way to start the day with this kind of positive intention about your value or what you're grateful for. Again, this might be a good starter for a morning fitness activity or something like that as well. Another one, and you'll see these techniques used throughout the presentation, is maybe savoring. So there's, you could savor or study something like a flower, or could even be the food that you're eating, or the cup of tea that you're sipping, or the birds that you're watching. But really lose yourself in the details, kind of breathing in and out, really focusing, closing your eyes then, and having that image come to mind. So again, why are we doing these things? So there's research that suggests that if you have focused attention, this elicits deep happiness and will stimulate your best work. So, and even you could try this throughout the day as well. 60 seconds to change your brain. So changing that neuroplasticity. So why positive psychology, and kind of what's the difference between positive psychology and positive thinking? Well, positive psychology is a science, and there's great evidence that supports this in not only psychology, but neuropsychology and neurobiology as well. And what they have found is that it resets the amygdala. So the amygdala is that almond-shaped part of your brain that is shown to play a key role in processing your emotions. In humans, this brain structure is linked to both fear responses and pleasure responses. So conditions such as anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder are linked to the abnormal functioning of the amygdala. And so it creates some damage and some developmental problems or some neurotransmitter imbalances. So through the process of positive psychology, through some of these theories like authentic happiness, flow, I'm going to talk specifically about flow, and optimism, we can use these to treat or to work with folks that have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, but it also leads to some social successes as well, which we know is extremely important. And this compares to positive thinking, which some would say is a fad. It's more simplistic or casual, maybe a little Pollyanna-ish, maybe a little superficial, and there's no research that suggests the effectiveness for helping with depression or anxiety. So just think about the science, the brain science. So again, let's focus on these positive psychology tenets. And again, the three cornerstones are positive emotions, positive individual traits, and positive institutions. I think these three things would be great to write down because you could weave these into your daily practices. So the first one, positive emotions. So the point of well-being is that happiness or the good life is viewed as an increase in positive emotions or pleasurable experiences within a person. And so this is why I really love this positive psychology information, is because I think it fits great into what we do: recreation and leisure, life enrichment, activity program. This is really what we're all about, trying to elicit and increase these positive emotions and pleasurable experiences within a person. So let's think about, how do we create a positive day? And sometimes I think it helps if we can think about this ourselves and how we might create a positive day for ourselves. And then we might be a little bit more able to relate this to how can we create a positive day for the residents that we serve. So how do we create a day where there's positive emotions? Does it involve things that we love to do? Are we surrounded by people that we care about? Are we involved with institutions that help us live our lives in meaningful ways? And when I say institutions, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, I'm not only talking about, where you work, or for the residents where they live, but I'm also thinking about your family, your partners, your community, the society in general. So if you think about what your most positive day would be, trying to create those most positive emotions, what would it be? And then how can this translate into thinking about how we can create these days for the clients that we work with? Another tenet of positive psychology is positive individual traits. And I've come to love these via character strengths. If you're not familiar with this is the link to the website. And I would encourage you to take and identify your own strengths and virtues. And again, so that you can understand how you can develop them in your own self. And then understanding there's 24 of these strengths. And then understanding maybe the clients that you work with and the strengths that they have and appreciating them, and then trying to think about how you can use their strengths, these positive individual traits, to help them engage. And these are my top 5. And again, I'd encourage you, what are yours? And then what are your clients? And I'm going to talk about, say, if I was a resident in a long-term care facility or assisted living, how I might use my strengths to help me engage. But these are my top 5: appreciation of beauty and excellence, kindness, perseverance, curiosity, and teamwork. So keep this whole idea of positive individual traits and character strengths in mind, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we can incorporate those into our practice. The next one is positive institutions. And again, these are things that surround us and help us live our life in a better way. And again, positive institutions are not only, where we work, but maybe where we go to school, our family, friends, community, society, or our partners. But where you work is where the residents live. So this is their home. So how can you create positive institutions within their home where you work? But also, how can you create better institutions with their family, with their friends, with their larger community or society? First off, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the difference in organizational culture. And I know there's been a lot for many, many years now. The Pioneer Network has really worked on this, and many organizations have really shifted from a more institutional or medical model to a more social model. In the handout I've provided, I've given you a little kind of Likert scale on a scale from 1 to 10 to see where your organization fits in, which I think is interesting. When I've done these things before with other groups, most people are kind of in the middle. And I'll kind of talk a little bit out loud about what this might mean for your culture, but I think it's important to understand. So an institutional model of care may focus more on care tasks compared to focusing on living and self-care for the residents. And the institutional model may focus on scheduled routines and kind of sticking to those routines compared to more flexible routines based on the wants, needs, and desires of the residents. In an institutional model, the staff may rotate, and what I mean there is not consistent staffing, so the residents don't get a chance to kind of develop relationships. So a social model would be more consistent staffing. An institutional model would be the decisions are made for the residents, compared to social model of care where decision making is made by the residents and possibly with their families as well. In an institutional model, the environment is a workplace. In the social model, it's the resident's home. In an institutional model, it's more structured activity schedule as compared to a more planful, but also leaving some room for more spontaneous activities. An institutional model may be more hierarchy as it relates to departments compared to a more collaborative approach to teams. And then an institutional model may be providing care for the residents as compared to developing those mutual relationships between the staff and the client. So again, this just gives us an idea of where our organizational culture might be, and I think it helps with our program planning. This next slide really has to do with what are our views on aging. And so I would challenge you to think about, what are your views on aging? Are they more deficits-based, which would be considered more negative, or more asset-based, which would be considered more positive? So when we think about aging, are we focusing on all the losses? Or are we thinking about and celebrating what they can do, where they're at, and what remains? Are we thinking about aging as the problems that occur, the burdens that may happen, or are these opportunities to embrace? Are there moments in people's days that can bring joy? Are we focusing more on what is not working as compared to what is working and what can be done? Are we missing what used to be? Or are we really embracing the present moment, what is happening now? When we think about behavioral signs of discomfort and distress, are we treating those? Or are we proactively thinking about and preparing for how to prevent these? And thinking about what the signs of discomfort or distress are, and thinking about behaviors as unmet needs and trying to help people meet those needs, or even kind of cutting them off at the pass, preparing, kind of thinking ahead of time before the behaviors occur. Are we thinking about ourselves as a therapeutic presence? When we think about aging, are we thinking about the imperfections, kind of the end product? Or are we thinking about the process of aging, the connections that we can make in those moments? And then the last one, are we thinking about things that we can't do anymore and having others do those things for us? Or are we thinking about ways that we can do things together, or we can provide support, or we can provide appropriate cueing techniques in order to encourage as much independence as possible, or thinking about sharing a task? So again, I challenge you to think about your own views about aging. And again, are they more deficits or asset based? And then thinking about trying to shift that thinking to more asset based. So this is really the cornerstone of positive psychology, this PERMA model. And this PERMA model of well-being is developed by Martin Seligman and in his book Flourish, which he is the pioneer and the founding father of positive psychology. If you're interested in this, there's tons of YouTube clips out there as well as many books on this model. And PERMA stands for positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishments. And again, this is why I think this is so perfect for what it is that we do on a daily basis as recreation or life enrichment or activity people, because we are trying to create well-being, and I think that we kind of naturally do it through PERMA. But positive emotions is an obvious connection to happiness. It's focusing on those positive emotions, but again, it's more than just smiling. It's really the ability to remain optimistic and view one's past, present, and future from a constructive perspective. So happy people really look back on the past with gladness, look into the future with hope, and they enjoy and cherish the present. So how can we teach people to really focus on that positive emotion? The next one is engagement. And activities that meet our need for engagement flood the body with neurotransmitters and hormones that elevate one's sense of well-being. So this engagement helps us to remain present, as well as synthesize the activities where we find calm, where we find focus and joy. So we all know that people find enjoyment in lots of different things. You know, maybe they play instruments, or they used to be involved in a sport, or they like to dance, or, you know, an art activity or an interesting hobby or project. So it's going to be different for everybody. But engagement happens when kind of time is flying by during the activity. People are really involved. It absorbs the current moment. And there's something called a state of flow that occurs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this theory in a little bit. But that's extremely important to this process of positive psychology and this PERMA model of well-being. The next is relationships. And relationships and social connections are really crucial and meaningful in people's lives. And too often in our Western culture, lots of people think of, you know, happiness or building, that we do this ourselves. We build happiness kind of individually. But realistically, we're all social animals. We're hardwired to bond to people, to depend on other people. So there's a basic need for some healthy relationships. And we all thrive on connections that promote some love, intimacy, and strong emotional interactions with other human beings. And positive relationships can be with the caregivers, could be with their children, with their friends, with other residents. So the key ingredient is really joy. And strong relationships also provide support and encourage resilience when times get tough for people. So meaning is, you know, this answer that we have. Why, trying to search for this answer, why are we here on this earth? It really drives fulfillment. And sometimes we answer these questions through religion or our own spirituality. But other times we can create meaning through great community, family, children, or volunteering, or providing service for a cause that you believe in, or expressing yourself creatively. So meaning is key to PERMA. And then the last one is accomplishments. So having goals and ambitions are part of accomplishments. These need to be realistic, of course. But accomplishments in life is important and it pushes ourselves to thrive and again flourish. But when I think about this PERMA model and I think about this accomplishments, are we really asking our residents what their goals are? And are we helping them achieve their goals? So being aware of this PERMA model might help you consider, you know, the meaning and fulfillment of the lives that people that we serve. And I really think the next step is how to integrate this model into our practice. And I think the first thing I'd probably do is just hang this model, you know, in front of my desk so I see it on a daily basis. And then the next time you go to plan, you know, your activities or interventions, I'd like you to think about how you're incorporating PERMA into the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. So this next slide comes from, I think, a great book. It's called Positive Psychology Approaches to Dementia Care. But this is also, I think, great for, you know, older adults or anybody really. So if you're interested in this book, I did provide a picture of it on the slide there. But these are just some things that I pulled. I'm going to talk about a few of them, not all of them, about the different types of activities that you may do in order to, use these types of groups, or even you could use these as tag-alongs for an activity, or you could use them as icebreakers or debriefing opportunities, a way to start and end a session. They could be used in lots of different ways. So I'm going to give you some examples, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the first one, again, these are just some examples, things that I've seen done and things that I've done, but there's millions of them, millions of ideas. So engaging gratitude activities. So on the upper left-hand corner, you see a journal, and this is a paper sack journal, and this is a creative way to express, ways that you may be grateful, and it's also very artistic, and it's fun to do. The way they look is cute and fun. People typically enjoy these things. In the middle is prompts, and this could be sentence prompts, and these could be, something at the beginning or end of a group. You could have a series of sentence prompts as tabletops for discussions during dinner time. Again, this is all going to depend on the type of clients that you're working with and what situation that you're in. You see the bottom left is some arts and crafts activities that you could do. Here we have a flower where people are cutting out leaves and putting what they're grateful for and developing an art display. We have a grateful tree that could be, put in your activity room or as you walk into the facility, and having opportunities to write down, leaves available for people to write down what they're grateful for. Here we have a gratitude jar. This could be something that, again, you could do at the end of an activity. You could have a jar at your front desk, so anybody could write down what they're grateful for. You could display these later. So lots of different kind of ideas. But really, gratitude is an emotion that expresses appreciation. And gratitude starts with an acknowledgement that life is good and rewarding, and positive thinking can be motivating. So there's, again, lots of ways to think about incorporating gratitude activities into your practice. The next one is forgiveness, and this is a concept of positive psychology. And we hear this term quite a bit, and what is it exactly? It's really kind of looking at kind of summing up your experiences and consistently as possible, trying to, forgive and kind of free up space in your heart, so the residents aren't holding on to maybe some old resentments and pain. And these can take up space in people's minds and hearts. So we may be able to help them kind of move forward with some kindness and compassion, not only for themselves, but for the others around them. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean, again, forgiveness is a spectrum, and we can kind of move back and forth through it. And it doesn't necessarily let somebody back into their lives, but you're really just helping them, maintain some good boundaries, but also, opening their hearts and being, not only forgiving themselves, but other people as well. So if this might not be kind of your cup of tea, you may want to think about co-facilitating something like this with who's ever in charge of the spirituality at your organization, which could be a minister, or you could work with a social worker, or possibly nursing. But you could establish some compassion practices. So again, this could be journaling or creative writing or art. It should say meditation, not medication, excuse me. You could practice forgiveness meditations, loving kindness meditations, could be guided visualizations. If anybody's familiar with Brene Brown, she's a PhD social worker. She has a fabulous website. She has tons of resources and worksheets. And again, you could just have kind of spontaneous corner, a forgiveness corner, where there's a variety of different activities or worksheets that people could kind of work on their own. These could also be bulletin boards that provide some education. So there's lots of different things that you could do. Some of the compassion practices, again, could be at the end of an exercise program or at the beginning of an exercise program. Or after a creative expression or art class or something like that. So there are some games out there I've found too that help people with this conversation of forgiveness. So there's some things that you could do that I think could help people open people's hearts a little bit and help them forgive not only themselves but others. The next thing is engaging savoring strategies. So these are ways to help your clients during the recreation and leisure activities, kind of teaching them how to savor. So savoring doesn't require years of training or any kind of special equipment. Anybody can start savoring at any moment in time. So basically, it's simply stepping back to notice a positive event and all the details surrounding the event, and then letting those feelings in and allowing those positive feelings to occur, but also to linger. So achieving happiness is better approached as a mental and physical slowing down that helps people find a deep appreciation through reflection. And this could happen, you could help people savor not only our recreation and leisure activities, but music or walks or specific moments during the day or relationships. And there is a little method. It's called the scone. And first it's slowing down, giving yourself time to notice things that you might not notice things, normally. Pausing frequently. It could also be considering the context. So if you're outside and it's a beautiful day, kind of noticing that. And if people have any religious or spiritual connections, what is the bigger picture here? Or even scientific backgrounds, what's the bigger picture here? So noticing the context, if it's art that you're looking at or great music that you're listening to, what is the context? Who's the artist? Things like that. So appreciating that context. And then opening up your senses. So this is the idea of spending, several minutes noticing. What do you hear? What do you touch? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? And then having people savor those things. And then just enjoying the moment, taking the time, being grateful for that experience, being appreciative that you're aware and that you're alive, contemplating, thinking about the interconnections of things. These are all strategies that you can help with savoring. And again, being in the present moment brings more positive emotions. So I promised that we talk about flow a little bit. So engagement and flow. This is a theory that's been around for a long time. And basically flow is making sure that you're connecting a challenging activity that requires skill. So if you see the little chart on the right, on the x-axis, you see challenges. On the y-axis, you see skills. And then in the middle is the flow channel. So what we really want to do is make sure that the recreation activity is challenging enough and requires the right skills. Because if it's too challenging, the client will be anxious. If they do not have the skills, they will be anxious. If it's not challenging enough, they'll be bored. And if they don't have the skills, they will also be bored. So it's really up to you to, find that flow channel for the people that you work with. Because people, when they're in flow, it leads to flourishing, happiness, well-being. And when they're in flow, they're more engaged. And so there's a loss of awareness of time. You lose your sense of self. It's very active. And I mean, not necessarily physically active, but also mentally and socially engaging. It feels effortless to them, and excitingly, people want to repeat the activity. So for us, that would be making sure that we're providing activities that meet the client's level of function and also meet their interests. So that, and we'll have to know these things as to what is their level of function and what is their interests. And then providing the types of adaptive equipment that may be necessary, or also the types of cueing that would be appropriate for the client, or the type of setup that would be appropriate for the client so that they would be in a flow. And obviously this doesn't occur in kind of large group diversional activities, and it wouldn't probably occur when you would have a variety of, or a mix of folks, people that function at a variety of different levels. So you'd want to make sure that your group is small enough and would have similar abilities and skills in order to make flow occur. And then the next thing, again, I thought this was fun, engaging courage through activities. So courage really is doing something that, scares us. And there's probably a lot of things in many people's lives that scare people, but we do need to call on our courage and face our ordeals. And this makes us brave and bold and daring, and also is a very positive approach. So how can we call on our courage? How can we help our clients do that? And again, poems, and if you're interested in, poetry, there's some great websites out there. The Poetry Therapy Association has some great activities. The Journal Therapy Association. There's lots of simple ways to encourage poetry writing that I think is like alpha poems, or a variety of other things that you could do. But also there's bibliotherapy. You could use short stories, and you could just read these short stories and then ask people to respond. You could use storytelling, reminiscence, expressive art. I like this idea of a wall of courage. And this may be something that you could do where people would, who have you found courageous in your lifetime? Again, Brené Brown on her websites has lots of information as it relates to courage worksheets and courage activities. You could use, again, writing prompts. Again, these could be tabletops. It could be things that you talk about before and after activities, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an activity all in of itself. And then humor, we've all heard of humor, and we know that humor is the best medicine, and actually there's tons of research that would suggest that as well. So that's great. It takes on many forms. It could be funny movies, it could be bulletin boards, daily jokes, laughter yoga's fun. It could be riddles or funny stories, or improv night, or Mad Libs, which is a fun game and activity. But there could be humor carts. You could have volunteers that come in as well. But there's tons of benefits to humor. You know, we all know that it connects us to people, which is important, but it relieves stress, it relieves fears and anxiety, it helps boost the immune system, improves our mood, helps us feel more in control of things and connected to things. But again, there's lots of different types of humor out there, so you want to be careful. Not everybody finds the same things funny, so you want to make sure that you're appropriate with your humor. You don't want to belittle or insult people. And you also want to make sure that that it's not, you want to be culturally sensitive to other people's race, gender, ethnicity. So, but humor activities are fun things and also lead to well-being. So using your strengths, again, I promised I'd talk a little bit about how you might use people's strengths. Again, there's 24 of these character strengths. My top 5 are what I mentioned earlier. But if I was in a long-term care facility or, you know, assisted living facility, how might I appreciate you using my strengths? So my top one is noticing and appreciating beauty and excellence. And, you know, for me, it would be if you had a performance, you know, I would probably really appreciate that, but I would also like the opportunity to talk about it a little bit and for people to notice that I'm appreciating these things. But also nature, art, could be those types of things as well. I also, again, like talking about these things. Kindness. So doing favors or good deeds, helping people, taking care of them. So if people have kindness as their character strength, you may ask them to be a part of your service project that you're incorporating, or you may, as you invite them to an activity, you could say, could you help me? You could give them small tasks to do, or if you have a good deed group at your agency, they could be part of that. Perseverance, this is kind of starting what you finish, getting things out the door and taking pleasure in kind of completing tasks. So if you have somebody that has perseverance, you might want to think about how can you encourage, you know, even completing the smallest of tasks, depending on where they're at. And then curiosity, this is a huge one for me. And as I grow older, I'm sure I will still want to learn and do and explore and discover, as would other people that you're working with. So finding ways to help me do that. And then teamwork, working well as a member or a group. So finding ways, if somebody has this as their strength, to, you know, incorporate them in a group or club or part of a team so they could work with them. And this kind of gets to kind of normalizing activities, and I always like the idea of using clubs because I do think it kind of normalizes things. So strengths, using strengths. Creativity and enjoyment or engagement, excuse me. I do not ignore creativity. It's really people's, you want to have them express their passions as much as they can. It really heightens people's happiness and their sense of fulfillment and self-actualization. It's really, for a lot of people, the reason for being. And again, it's not only just art or music or writing, things like that. Lots of people can be creative in lots of different ways. And when people don't use that creative spark that they might have, it really leads to kind of some stuckness and resentment and some unhappiness. So encourage people to grow and learn. You know, anytime you're doing something original is creative. Another thing I wanted to talk about is leisure education. And this could also be maybe called wellness education as well. And as I mentioned earlier, people may need to be educated on some of these approaches and techniques. So you could have a wellness education program that does these things and encourage people to be more self-aware of these things, acquiring these attitudes and knowledges and skills, helping people become more self-determined and seeking out these positive psychological approaches, how to incorporate these into our recreation and leisure opportunities, understanding our resources and how they could use those things to lead a more positive life. And then on the left, I'm just kind of suggesting a typical kind of educational format that you may use. So you can look at that. These are just some of the approaches or the theories and approaches that may be helpful, and these are specifically for dementia care. One is best friends. I'm a certified best friends master trainer. This is a relationship-centered approach. So best friends is a metaphor, basically for how would you develop a relationship with folks, just like you would with your best friend. So same characteristics. And here we're seeing, I'll just highlight a few things, some of the backbones of best friends is really embracing a person's life story, understanding, what their likes, desires, interests, passions are, and some of the things, where they've lived, what they've done, what their education's like, to help with building some relationships and helping people move forward as they age. And then the other one I wanted to point out is this knack, and this is kind of doing things with ease, doing things that are difficult with ease. And this is just knowing the people, being able to provide nurturing towards them, approaching them respectively, being able to communicate and establish good community and relationships and kinships with them. This next is the Dementia Bill of Rights. I provided a handout for you. I would encourage you to look at this. I think this is through a Health Professions Press, and I think they've done a nice job with this Bill of Rights. I really like this, so I'd encourage you to look at that. This is Teppa Snow's approach. If you'll notice, the Alzheimer's Association, when they have their stages of dementia, they're all focuses, those stages from early to end stage, is all about loss and problems and impairments and disabilities and inabilities. Her approach, which I like, even though it's early to end stage, is all about what they can do at these different stages, what they're most comfortable doing, what they enjoy, and what's pleasant for them. So again, a more positive approach to care. Okay, here we have, I just want you to think, this is again a more positive approach. How can we change the way we see things? So life is all about how we see things. So this last information is about appreciative inquiry. This is a technique in positive psychology that helps us gain a positive perspective on the world and invites us to see ourselves and what's happening through an appreciative or valuing eye. So I just took these steps and then thought about this webinar. So the first step is discover. So I would maybe ask, what's the best part of learning about positive psychology? And then I would ask you to dream. Now imagine what your practice might look like using these approaches. And then I would ask you to design. What's one way you may incorporate a positive psychological approach into your practice? And then deliver would be to create. And again, you can use this appreciative inquiry technique for lots of different things. All right, so I think we're getting close to ending. If anybody has any questions, I'd be willing to entertain those now.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for this great presentation. I'm going to flash quickly the resources you mentioned. And it's interesting because one of the first things you discussed was how we focus more on the deficit versus the asset, right? And that's one of the roots of ageism. And as you might remember, at Link Senior, we have this Old People at Core project. So that got us smiling. But the other thing also, it was interesting to see from your presentation how much engagement is weaved into, for example, the PERMA model.
Yes.
And
perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things you discussed are things that we've been requested and highlighting in some of our webinars. For example, the Montessori technique method is very focused on the can-do. And actually, our next speaker next month is Jennifer Brush, and she's going to be talking about that.
Oh, great.
And obviously, lastly, I thought that one of the things that was very powerful in what you did, Nancy, was helping us understand how some of these models can be applied, right? You even made the effort of taking some of these questions, made them practical with yourself. So with that, I'd love to see if we have any questions, and we have a few minutes for that. And I think, one of the first questions, Nancy, here that we have is, as we look at our organizations, right, whether it's an institutional or a social model, who do you believe or who have you seen to be the best champion for this kind of change within an organization, whether it's an assisted living or a nursing home? What have you seen to be successful?
Well, I think it has to come from the top. They have to, I think, whoever your administrators are or whoever owns the company really needs to buy into the model and the approach. But everybody really needs to buy in. But if you don't have buy-in from the people at the top, it's going to be hard to get buy-in from everybody. So definitely.
Okay. Great. Well, that's helpful. Now, kind of a follow-up question that we were, as a, understanding that some people on the line today might not be at the top, right?
Yes.
How can we equip these people that are listening to us right now with ideas or suggestions on how they can bring that to people that are at the top?
Yes, well, advocacy is so important, and part of advocacy is really educating yourself about what's important and what the research says, what the trends are in care, and having these conversations. And I mean, I've done this for a long time. It's not easy, but certainly eventually they start listening to you. I've given people research articles to read. I speak up in meetings. I've got my elevator speech already. Sometimes I can be a bit of a broken record in a nice way, but it's really, advocating. And that's certainly one of our roles. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think it's really one of our roles. We're always advocating for the clients that we serve. And hopefully, administrators and we'll see that's where your heart is and that's what you're trying to do. So.
Right. Thank you for that. So I think another question is, how do you have resources that you would recommend for people to apply that in their everyday programming, right? So say I'm an activity director and I'm thinking about next month, the activities I'm going to be planning and preparing for my residents. How can I take your presentation today and build that in?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back and look through the slides, I started to do that for you.
Right.
Yeah, I've given you some resources, but I've also, through the PowerPoint slides, I've given you, models, I've given you the tenants, I've given you some examples of, engaging positive psychology groups, or even in the presentation, I provided examples. It doesn't have to be a group. It could be a tag along, like something you do at the beginning or the end, or it could be a bulletin board. It could be a tabletop with some discussion starters. It could be a corner in your activity room. You've got a gratitude corner, you've got a forgiveness corner, you've got a courage corner, where people can go and look at the information. So it's really just going to depend on where you are at, what the type of facility that you're at, what the skill level of the residents that you're at. But I would just start somewhere. You can look at the PERMA model and start thinking about, how are you going to incorporate, number one, positive relationships or positive emotions, excuse me. At the very end, I would look at that appreciative inquiry model that I just gave you, and that's really the action step. That's one of the last slides. So think about what was the best part of learning about positive psychology, and then the next one is dream. Imagine what your practice might look at. So these are things for, I think, you to do and your team to do, and to really think and reflect about, write those things down. What's one way you're going to start? You don't have to do the whole thing all at once,
Okay.
But,
Great.
What's one approach you're going to use next month, that you're
Great.
going to incorporate?
Well, thank you so much for answering these questions, Nancy. Thank you also for taking the time to present to the group today. If anyone has further questions, we have Nancy's email. And again, repeating that the handout and the slides were shared in the GoToWebinar room.
And just so everyone knows, the survey evaluation link for CEU credit has been posted in the chat box in the webinar room. Remember to fill that out by Thursday at midnight. I'll be sending an email out shortly this afternoon with the link to the survey as well. And as Charles said, the handouts are in the handout section of the webinar room. And we just hope that you'll all save the date for the next webinar, which will be July 23rd. And as Charles mentioned, that will be with Jennifer Brush, who was a speaker for the webinar series last year and will be continuing the conversation around Montessori. So we hope to see you then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Take care.